Hello, World History class, and welcome to Crash Course My Style. And today I'm going to be talking to you about how Japan returns to isolation. So let's get to it. In the 1200s, Japan had achieved total unity, and some historians say it's because of the spread of Islam, which I think is kind of weird because that wasn't their religion. They were Buddhist. So I think that's weird. But other people say that's because of Genghis Khan and how he was ruling Japan. It's really debatable as to why they had complete unity in the 1200s. But that all ended in the 1300s when things started to break down again. So the first problem was the new rulers, who didn't really rule much at all. They were really just daimyos. That's what they're called. They were really just daimyos that was over the new feudal system, which is basically just a bunch of like tiny states, and they were all broken up and stuff. So there's basically like figureheads. Basically, they're basically figureheads that were over these states, and they're also daimyos are also called warrior chieftains, but they're lords in Japanese feudalism. But anyways, majority of them thought that they could gain total power if they had very loyal people, but that wasn't really the case. Like they figured because they're a tiny feudal state, trusted them that they could take these people and go and fight another feudal state and get those people and keep fighting and fighting and fighting until they build up an army and that they could end up taking over the country that way. But that was not the case. They couldn't do that. So, in 1568, Oda Nobunaga did fight and gained the capital, which was Kyoto at the time, which turns into Edo, which then turns into Tokyo, which is today's capital of Japan. But he also did not unify Japan, unfortunately. He was close, but after one of his closest generals betrayed him, he committed seppuku. Although Oda Nobunaga was not able to unify Japan, just 8 years later, Toyotomi Hideyoshi controlled most of Japan and wanted China too. But he also died in 1598, and his troops were taken from their place in Korea, and then Tokugawa shogunate, which becomes a dynasty after he dies and his son takes over, that becomes their dynasty or whatever. He finishes unifying Japan. Now we are at the 1600s. The unification of Japan was complete, and it took them forever to do this. So it took like 3 people to do it, but after Tokugawa died, only 16 years later, his son Hidetada, who followed his father's advice, which was to put the people first and everything would be okay, they had about 2.5 centuries of prosperity. So everything in Japan was cool. I mean, it was all structured. It was broken down. So first you had the familiar face, which is just the emperor, which is kind of like our president when you think about it. I mean, like our president does do things, but he can't do much without the Congress's say. So if you ask me, that's kind of like the same thing. So first you have the emperor, and then you have the shogun, who is like our Congress and makes all the shots. Then you have the daimyo, or the daimyo. Oh my gosh, I'll get this right, I swear. But then you have the daimyo, which is like all the people who are over our states or whatever. And then you have the samurais, who are basically the people who are under them, or like citizens or whatever. And then you have our peasants and our artisans, which is our poor people. And then you have our merchants, which is, I don't know. I guess back then being a merchant was kind of like a bad thing, almost, kind of. But right now, I guess you can compare a merchant to a business owner, which is like the best thing you can be right now. Well, not the best thing, but you know, like it's a good thing to be. So there's that, if you want to compare the two things. So once you get to the middle of the 1700s, Japan starts to shift from a rural society to an urban society. A rural society is like a farm-like place, and an urban society is more of like I don't know how to say it, like a technology-based society, like New York. So if you need an example, a rural society would be like Nevada, where there's just farms and stuff or something. At least that's where I think there's farms and stuff. I don't know. But then you have the urban society, which is like New York City. So the population in Edo, which I told you was Kyoto, which ended up changing to Edo, had slightly over 1 million people, which was the largest city in the world at the time. So I guess you could say that their Edo is our New York. Again, that's just what I think. Yeah, so women usually work jobs in entertainment, textile manufacturing, and publishing. Those are like the three main things that they did, and their tradition had become a huge thing in Japan. Like it was like the best thing you could do. So most Japanese families hung paintings in their homes that showed scenes from their kind of classical literature. And a lot of things that they participated in was like drama and art and literature. But unfortunately, all of that starts to come to a very um unfortunate end. I said unfortunate like 3 times, but anyways, starts to come to an end because the Europeans began to come to Japan, which we're finally getting to the point why they even went back to isolation. And I guess you could say it was the Europeans' fault. So the last point in time that I told you about was the 1700s, but their first encounter with Europeans was actually all the way back in the beginning in 1543, and it was because Portuguese sailors had a shipwreck and they washed up onto shore, and so they began to sell things to like make a living there because obviously they had no way back home. But they began to sell things like tobacco and muskets and clocks, and other Japanese merchants traded with them so that they could expand their business too. And it wasn't uncommon for samurais to lose their life in battle to muskets because they always fought with swords, and that was like the traditional thing to do. But once you think about it, that makes perfect sense that they would die, and they would die to a musket because you have this army, they've all got swords, they're running to all these people who have guns. That makes no sense. Obviously, they're just gonna shoot at them until they all die. So I guess, yeah, that made no sense. I mean, I understand that it was a traditional thing, and so like being a samurai and fighting with a sword, like you had to do it. But I don't know. I guess if I was a samurai, I'd have a little musket in my pocket or something. Something, I don't know. But so not only did Portuguese come to Japan, but so did Christian missionaries, and they began to arrive in 1549. So this problem had already began long before Japan was even unified in the first place. But 51 years later, after they came, 300,000 people, Japanese people, had converted to Christianity, and the ruler at the time, which was Hidetada, I mean not at the time, but after all of this had already happened, the ruler afterwards, Hidetada, had an attitude about it because their original religion is Buddhism, and so he was upset about it. So even though he was afraid that he would get rid of the very people who was like making their economy better, which was the merchants, the Portuguese merchants and stuff like that, he knew that he had to get rid of them somehow, so way those people could not stay there because they were ruining the base of Japan and the bases of Japan, and he hated it. So he started to get rid of them. So he started to like hunt down Christian missionaries, and he would like kill them and slaughter them, and they would just leave. And if they hadn't been killed already, they probably had already left in the first place. And so in 1637, about 30,000 peasants, with the help of an angry samurai, tried to overthrow Tokugawa. But with so many of them being Christians, he ordered for all of them practicing Christianity to be killed. So that's what sparked him trying to kill people. It wasn't even just the fact that they were ruining the basis of Japan, which is Buddhism in the first place. It was the fact that they tried to overthrow him. So that's really what like basically pissed him off into like killing a whole bunch of Christians, which I'm a little offended by. But I mean, it's just cool. I don't have anything to do with that. But that means most of the Europeans earlier, like I had said, were already either killed or had already left. And Japanese people were forced to practice Buddhism. So if you were Japanese, you had to practice Buddhism, and he didn't care what branch it was, but it had to be Buddhism. If he found out that you were still a Christian after all of that had happened, you died. Like Tokugawa, he was so upset about it, about his people who he'd been so nice to, who he had gave them 2.5 centuries of prosperity to, had tried to overthrow him because he wasn't a Christian. So yeah, he wasn't playing with them. So he said, either you a Buddhist or you're gonna die. So either you choose my religion or you choose death. That's basically how it was. So not to say that he was a dictator or anything, but he was a dictator. But anyways, So all of this led to the closed country policy, which we finally got to it. While European ideas were never really what the leaders wanted in the first place, it was kind of a part of merchandising that everyone benefited from. So in 1639, Tokugawa had closed off Japan's borders. So basically that meant that nobody came in, nobody went out. If you were Japanese and he caught you trying to leave, then you were killed automatically. He didn't care. The only people that were allowed in were Dutch and Chinese merchants, which is kind of weird because Japanese didn't like Chinese, but I guess they still had to get things, so they let them in anyways. But yeah, that's how it was. So some of the other rules of the closed country policy was Japanese ships were strongly forbidden to leave Japan. So if but I always thought, like, what if they had a war or something? Like, did they have to stay there and they had to let their enemy come to them? I don't know, but I guess that's how they did it. And like I said, Japanese people had to stay in Japan. If you tried to leave, he'd kill you. And that is the end of this crash course, people. We got through it. We made it. Yes. Yes. Okay, that's the end. Bye.